Shalom. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to read now Matthew chapter 2 in the New International Version. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I might divide this video up into a few sections just to make it a little shorter, a little easier to listen to. Let's start with chapter 2 here. This is about the birth of Jesus, this particular chapter. Not only about the birth of Jesus, but also about how Joseph took Mary and the baby, the toddler, actually, by that time, Jesus, down to Egypt for a very short period of time, and then returned from Egypt, bypassing Jerusalem, went back to live in Nazareth, which is actually their hometown. So let's look at the first part, which is about when the Magi come to visit young Jesus. He's probably about a toddler by this time. All right, take a look at this. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people." By the way, that's a quote from Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. So the prophets were declaring the birthplace of Jesus, or the birthplace of the Messiah. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Let's break this little part down briefly. First of all, Magi. Who in the world are the Magi? There's a lot of debate about who the Magi are. They don't know if they are members of the religion called the Zoroastrianism. They were Zoroastriist, or they were astrologers in general, diviners of some sort, maybe. They might even have been Jewish sages, although that's not 100% certain either. Either way, these astrologers, because they were paying attention to the stars, and they understood the significance that a particular star would have. So here they are in Persia looking. Now they're looking towards the west, by the way, and they see this star. And they recognize this is not an ordinary star. So because of that, though, they began to understand, because of Jewish influence from the Jews had been in captivity there for hundreds of years. And now the Jews were no longer in captivity. Now they were living there as citizens. But they were teaching in the synagogues the things that the prophets were saying. And these Magi, these wise men, understood, oh, this is the birth of that particular new king that was long promised to the Jews. They knew that. So they packed up and they brought their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And where did they go? They went to the king's palace, because where else do you expect a newborn king to be? So they went directly to King Herod's palace, bringing their gifts. And the next thing you know, Jesus is not there. And now this shakes up King Herod, because he hadn't heard that there was a king that had been born. King Herod, unfortunately, is a paranoid kind of guy. We know this because not only a Jewish historian, Josephus Flavius, who lived during that time, but also we know this because of two Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius. They wrote about him as well. King Herod is called Herod the Great, this particular Herod. There are three Herods in the New Testament. There's Herod the Great, Herod, his son named Archelaus, who rules after him until he rules after him from his death in 4 BC to 6 AD, when the Romans banished him to what was then called Gaul, Gaul. That is known as ancient, that's France, by the way. And then Archelaus' son, Herod, is the grandson of King Herod the Great. Herod is the Herod of Jesus's lifetime. He is the Herod that Jesus sees on his last days, right before Jesus is crucified. This is the Herod that we hear about. This is the Herod that has John the Baptist beheaded. So this is Herod the Great's grandson. So there's three Herods in the New Testament. So Herod the Great, let me get back to him real quick. He's called Herod the Great not because he was a particularly great person. He wasn't. He was called Herod the Great because he built a lot of fortresses, and he also all throughout Israel, he also added to the Temple Mount and built it up and made it very strong, very powerful. He is the reason why there is today in Israel a Western Wall. That's a part of the Temple Mount that Herod the Great, built up. So there was this massive rebuilding and massive updating of the temple and the Temple Mount. He is responsible for why there is a Temple Mount there today, because he had it built up and made it fortified. Now, the Romans destroyed the whole temple in 70 AD. They didn't destroy the Temple Mount. They destroyed the temple and whatever else was on the surface of the temple. They tore everything up. What I do think is interesting, though, is that that Temple Mount, King Herod died in 4 BC. And what is fascinating to me is that building project kept going, and it was finished in 40 AD. Remember, Jesus died about 33 AD, so about 7 years after the death of Jesus is when that Temple Mount construction project was actually finished. And then just 30 years later, the whole temple was destroyed by the Romans when they invaded in August of 70 AD. August 9th, by the way, 70 AD. The General Titus did that. I got sidetracked. So the Magi see this star. They pack up everything and they go to the king. Now, King Herod, by the way, is so paranoid. The Romans record this. Josephus records this. He had his wife Miriam strangled to death because he thought she was conspiring to have two of her sons put on the throne. He then had those two sons beheaded. And then it come to find out it was another one of his sons that created that fake threat. So then King Herod had that son executed as well. Executed 3 of his sons and a wife just because one of those sons lied and accused the others of trying to take over. Now, it's interesting to me that at one point Caesar Augustus actually said it is safer to be Herod's pig than to be his son, because Herod, he understood that the Jews don't eat pig, so safer to be Herod's son than to be his pig. That's pretty sad. All right, so these Magi arrive. They disturb the entire palace because now King Herod, who is a paranoid guy, is disturbed, and so he uses subterfuge basically to try to get the wise men to go find Jesus and then come back and tell him where he is, because he wasn't going to go worship Jesus. He was going to go kill Jesus. And we know that because of what happens later. So the gifts are presented. This star, by the way, this supernatural star shows up and guides them and stops over the house. Daytime, nighttime, the assumption is it's nighttime. So these wise men show up at the house. Now, Jesus is now in a house. Remember when they first came to Bethlehem, there was no room for them in the inn. So apparently they were staying in a courtyard of someone's house. Jesus was born. The only place that could pass for a cradle was a manger. So they laid Jesus in a manger. Manger, by the way, would have probably been carved out of limestone. And it would have been wouldn't have been a little wooden thing like you typically see on Christmas cards and stuff. That was more than likely an actual limestone carved out feeding trough. And this is what Jesus had for his first cradle. So a couple of years have probably passed. They're now living in a house of their own, making a living there. They decided to stay there for a while. Now they have gold, frankincense, and myrrh brought to them by these wise men. And then God warns them in a dream, don't go back to Herod. So they sneak out of Bethlehem, and there are ways, by the way, to get back to Persia without going through Jerusalem. There is a coastal road, and there is an eastern highlands road called the King's Highway, and that's on the eastern side. So they would have gone down through across the Jordan River and picked up that highway and went back up through Damascus and then back over to Persia from where they live. King Herod, then finding out that they hadn't showed up, is enraged, and that's the next thing that we take a look at. But they find out that Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Now, why is this important? This star is important, and being born in Bethlehem is important for prophecy. Remember, Matthew's main point about Jesus is that he is the fulfillment of all messianic prophecies. He is the long-awaited Messiah, and he is the son of David, King David. So that means that he is the Messiah. And, of course, he's born in Bethlehem, and that's King David's hometown, by the way, Bethlehem. It is the star, it is the born in Bethlehem, and it is the frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Oh, yeah, there's an old Christmas tradition that it was three wise men, and it's based on that because there were three gifts. In reality, we have no idea how many wise men showed up. We just know they gave them gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Could have been a couple of guys, could have been 40 guys. We don't know. We have no concept idea. We have the assumption that it was a sizable convoy, a caravan, because of, they're going to the temple. They're not showing up just to the handful, so it was probably impressive. But then they go to this little tiny town of Bethlehem, about 9 miles south, about 6 miles south of Bethlehem, and present these gifts. And I can't imagine how Joseph and Mary must have reacted to see these guys show up with all these gifts and bow down and worship their toddler. Something to think about. I'm going to end this video here and do more of Matthew in the next video. Thank you for joining me.